Hi, it's Jane here on the Wow Embossing YouTube channel. Did you know that you could heat emboss on acetate? Or maybe you did, but you were a bit nervous about it? Well, today I've got some top tips for you. Hey, thanks for joining me today. We are going to be doing some heat embossing on acetate today. And the acetate that I'm using is this heat resistant one from the Crafter's Companion. So I definitely recommend that you get some heat resistant acetate because that really helps with any warping, which is obviously one of the things that put a lot of people off from trying heat embossing on acetate in the first place. So for my first card, I am using this background cling stamp from Simon Says Stamp. With it being July, I'm big into Christmas in July projects at the moment. So all of my cards today are going to be Christmas cards. So I'm just cutting down this piece of acetate so that it fits in my MISTI, and I've taken the kind of mouse pad thing out of the MISTI because those red rubber cling stamps are quite thick, and so you don't need that mouse mat in your MISTI when you're using them. So I'm just giving this a really good inking up with my embossing ink pad, and you're going to see me do something now which I never normally do in Wow embossing videos, and that is add anti-static powder to my acetate. Now the reason I don't normally do this with Wow products is because they're treated with anti-static properties. However, acetate is so full of static. Everything will stick to it, and so we just need every bit of help that we can get when we're looking to get some crisp results. So I'm just going to grab this out of my MISTI, and I'm adding some gold embossing powder over the stamped image, and I'm just tapping off the excess as usual. One thing that I would advise that you do with acetate is give it a really good flick from behind, and that will really help knock off any of the excess powder that might have stuck somewhere on the acetate where we don't have embossing ink. Don't be afraid, really do give it a good hard flick. That is the best way that you are going to get rid of that excess powder and get clean results for your acetate. The next thing I would recommend that you do in order to reduce warping on your acetate panel is preheat your embossing gun, get it set to the highest setting and have it running for a minute or so to make sure it is nice and hot, because we want to move fast when we're embossing on acetate. You don't want to hover over a particular area for very long at all because you are going to start to get warping. So I tend to move quickly, try and do it from a height if possible, and just keep moving until all of that powder is melted. And you can see we've actually got a really nice, crisp, clean result there. So I'm just going to trim my panel down to it's an A2 size, so that's 4¼ inches by 5½. And we are going to make a stained glass effect today with alcohol markers. So I've just popped a scrap of paper underneath the panel so you can see the colour a little bit better. And I am basically just doing really simple colouring. I've chosen some pinks and some teals. I was actually going to go with a rainbow palette originally, but this kind of just stuck out at me as a nice colour scheme to go with that gold. And we're just going to be doing really basic colouring. There's no shading or anything involved. We're just going to be colouring on the reverse of the panel. And what I would say is, because it's such a slick surface, you need to be quite neat with your brush strokes, otherwise you will see some of the brush stroke lines. But you can go over that once the panel is fully dry. You can layer it up with more colour, but do leave enough drying time between coats. Otherwise, adding more ink onto that slick surface is just going to push the colour around. So once I finish my colouring, I have got my little scrap bag of specialty cardstocks, because I felt like I wanted something glittery to go behind those oversized Christmas baubles. So I have chosen a kind of off-white glittery cardstock for my background. And now I'm just moving on to making a frame for the card. I've used my waffle flower nesting rectangle dies, 2 sizes apart, and I have stuck them together with some washi tape around the edges. And I'm just taking a piece of white cardstock and I'm going to run this through my die cutting machine to make a white frame. I do have some frame dies somewhere, but I've not been able to get my hands on them for a couple of weeks. I don't know where they've gone. So I am just making my own here, but this is a good tip if you don't have any frame dies. You can just use your nesting dies to create your own. So I'm just adding a little bit of liquid glue around the edge of this frame, and then I'm going to add that over the top of my acetate panel. And one of the things that you can do if you have a little bit of warping on your acetate is to adhere it to card panels or frames or other things which are just going to help flatten it out and pull it tight a little bit so you don't have that warping. So having adhered all that down, I'm just going to pop a large acrylic block over the top and weight that down and again help flatten it out a little bit, and we are going to move on to making the sentiment. So this again is from Simon Says Stamp. It is a Happy Holidays sentiment, and it has a shadow layer and a word layer. I'm going to die cut both of them just from white cardstock, and then I am going to heat emboss the Happy Holidays words in the same gold that I used for the background stamp, so we've got that consistency. So I'm just pressing that word die cut into my embossing ink pad before adding my gold powder and then heat setting it on the highest setting with my heat gun. So I'm just adding some tiny dots of liquid glue to the reverse of the word sentiment, and then we're going to pop that down onto the shadow die. And then off camera I just placed it under an acrylic block for a second to flatten it out before we add it onto the card front. Generally, I like my sentiments to have a bit of dimension, so I am cutting down some of my Big Mama foam tape roll to go behind that sentiment, and I'm just going to be propping that up on the front of the card. And I wish that you could see the shimmer and the shine that sparkly paper brings to the overall card. But I really like how this one has turned out, so I hope you do as well. And then let's move on to another example. So this time we're going to be keeping things a little bit more clean and simple, and we are going to be making a shaker card where our sentiment is going to be heat embossed on the acetate window of the shaker. So as before, I'm just trimming down a panel of acetate to fit in my MISTI, and I'm going to dust it with a bit of anti-static powder. Again, as I mentioned earlier, this has got nothing to do with the powders that I'm using, but everything to do with the fact that acetate just attracts any kind of dust or anything else, will just stick to it like glue, even if it hasn't got any oils or embossing ink on it. So we just want to give that a really good dusting down before we add our embossing ink. So I'm just going to give this a good press down, make sure we get a nice crisp impression first time round. And then this time I'm going to be using my bright white embossing powder. And don't forget to give the panel a really good tap or a really good flick from the back to get rid of any of that excess powder where we don't want it. So again, I am just heat embossing this as quickly as possible. I've got my heat tool set to the highest setting, so I've preheated that so that's ready to go. And I am just moving quickly, not hovering on any particular area of the heat embossing for too long, so we can avoid that warping. And to get rid of any excess anti-static powder which might be on your panel, just grab a microfiber cloth. It can be dry or slightly damp, and that will dust right off. So I'm going to create my window for the shaker now. So I've grabbed the largest of the triangles in that nesting triangle set from MFT Stamps. I don't know why, but every time I look at them, I just see trees. And so I think that's what I've used them for the most. So we're going to cut a tree shape into this card front. Again, it's an A2 size, so that's 5.5 by 4.25 wide. And I am just checking to make sure that the heat emboss sentiment lines up nicely inside that tree shape, which it does perfectly. So that's great. I'm really pleased at how that's worked out. So I'm just going to add some liquid glue around that triangle shape to adhere our acetate panel behind the window. So I'm just going to pop a large acrylic block on top of this again to help flatten it down and glue everything in place. Sometimes when you've got a bit of warping on your acetate, you just need that extra bit of pressure to push it down onto the cardstock that it needs to stick to and help it all flatten out. So while that is drying, I am grabbing 3 of my green colours from Concord and Ninth. I have got Sprout, Parsley and Evergreen, which I think make a really nice Christmas tree colour. So I'm just ink blending those onto my card base, starting with the lightest and working down towards the darkest. Then I'm going to move my way back up again, just making sure that I get that nice blend between the colours and there's that seamless transition. So now that my acetate panel has dried, I'm going to bring that back in and just make sure that everything lines up okay. And I really like how that looks. I've just checked in my drawer of embellishments and discovered that I've got a lovely white Christmas shaker mix, which is perfect for this card. So I'm going to start making the shaker walls. So I'm using these thin foam strips, which are brilliant, and I'm just going to put them all around the edges of our Christmas tree shape so that we can add the shaker filling into the middle. That just means that you don't have to use as much shaker filling because you're not having to fill the entire card panel with it. And you'll have to excuse that my head keeps popping into the frame every now and again. I've got a new camera set up, which I'm still getting used to. So you may see the odd grey hair here and there in my videos for a few weeks while I get used to it. So now that I've finished adding the foam tape around the Christmas tree, I've added some to the rest of the card panel as well, just to make sure that the card isn't sagging anywhere. And I've added that shaker filling into the middle. So then I'm just going to line up the actual card with the ink blending side down on top of the shaker window and seal everything in. So obviously just giving it the obligatory shake to make sure everything is moving about as it should be and it's not escaping from anywhere. And then the final thing to do is just to add our shaker window onto a card base. And that completes our second and clean and simple shaker card. So that's two very different ideas of what you can do with heat embossing on acetate. I hope that helped. I hope there's some useful hints in there and you'll be encouraged to give it a go yourself. There will be a second part of this video coming soon, so keep your eyes peeled for that. But in the meantime, thank you for joining me once again, and I'll look forward to seeing you back here again soon. Okay, bye.